Mr. Carney of Canada yesterday morning.
Yes.
Canada is taking away some retaliatory tariffs.
He's removing his tariffs. He's removing his retaliatory tariffs, which I thought was nice. And we're going to have another call soon. Okay. Yeah, we had a very good call.
You're getting closer towards an
I like
agreement
him.
trade?
I like him. You know, look, Tom Cotton, a senator from Arkansas, is a great guy, friend of mine, supporter of mine, big supporter. I'm a supporter of his too. And he wrote a pretty nasty story about the head of Intel. And I said, well, if that's right, he should resign. And he came in, he saw me, we talked for a while. I liked him a lot. I thought he was very good. I thought he was somewhat a victim, but, you know, nobody's a total victim, I guess.
President Donald Trump just put two moves on the board that matter for markets and for America's closest ally. First, he publicly praised Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney after Canada announced it would lift many retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. Second, he unveiled a near 10% U.S. government stake in Intel, a direct bet on rebuilding chip capacity at home. Taken together, these actions sketch a clear doctrine: use trade pressure and targeted deals to deliver visible wins fast. Canada's tariff rollback, a win for Trump, with caveats. Trump framed Ottawa's step as proof that tariffs are working. Politically, it looks like a clean victory. An ally reverses course, the White House claims momentum, and the message to voters is simple: pressure brings results. But the fine print matters. Canada is lifting many counter tariffs while keeping measures on steel, aluminum, and autos. In other words, the heat has been turned down, not off. For Carney, this is a tactical de-escalation that stabilizes trade flows without abandoning core leverage in strategic sectors. For Trump, it is a headline win that supports his narrative that production and jobs are coming back to the U.S. From tariffs to equity stakes, Trump's hands-on economics. The Intel deal is the clearest signal yet of how far this White House will go. The government will invest about $8.9 billion for a 9.9% stake in Intel, small enough to avoid control, large enough to anchor the company's turnaround effort. The arrangement reportedly includes voting rights with limits, but the political story is straightforward. Washington is no longer just setting rules, it's taking positions. Economically, this is government as investor, a form of industrial strategy where the state nudges private capital by sharing both risk and upside. For Trump, the symbolism is powerful. The U.S. isn't pleading with firms to stay. It's buying in and setting conditions, from export permissions to tariff relief, so production happens on American soil. Two styles, one border. Put side by side, the approaches of Trump and Carney reveal a strategic contrast. Trump prioritizes speed and salience. Turn pressure into outcomes the public can see. Tariffs softened, a national stake in a flagship chipmaker, a talking point that the jobs are coming back. Carney's play is durable capacity. Reduce exposure to U.S. shocks by deepening ties with Europe, raising defense outlays, and quietly reinforcing supply chains. That shift is already visible in Canada's security and defense partnership with the EU and a multi-year defense spending ramp. The intended destination is a Canada that can cooperate closely with Washington, but won't be cornered by it. Why markets should care for companies? The mix of tariff leverage plus selective deals changes the calculus. If your supply chain depends on U.S. market access or licenses, the White House now has more than one lever: trade duties, agency approvals, and occasionally a seat on the cap table. That can unlock projects, as with Intel, but also inject policy risk into boardrooms. The cost of capital and strategic options may now swing with politics. For Canada-linked exporters, the near-term red is positive. Less friction on a broad set of goods, with pressure still concentrated in metals and autos. The medium-term red is more complex. As Canada re-hedges toward Europe and doubles down on domestic capacity, some cross-border trade may diversify rather than rebound. Is this sustainable? Trump's method works best when rapid, visible concessions are possible. Canada's tariff step fits that mold. So does an equity splash with a name brand like Intel. But sustaining the wins will require operational follow-through. Intel must land major foundry customers and execute on process technology. Equity alone doesn't shrink the gap with global leaders. Canada must balance easing tensions with protecting strategic industries, particularly autos and metals, while financing its defense ambitions without overstretching public accounts. The U.S.-Canada channel needs a rules-based floor under the politics, or each shock will invite a new cycle of tariff threats and countermoves. The geopolitical angle. there's a broader realignment underneath. If Washington uses tariffs and bespoke deals to onshore capacity, allies will seek redundancy, new markets, new partnerships, and new guarantees outside U.S. control. Canada's EU pivot is exactly that. The result may be a trading system that's less global and more block by block, with higher resilience but also higher costs. Bottom line, what Trump's latest moves mean. For Trump, he converts pressure into tangible headlines. Canada's rollback and the Intel stake let him argue that America First delivers real outcomes. Less foreign friction, more domestic investment. For Carney, he reduces near-term economic pain without giving up leverage where Canada is most exposed, while continuing a long game to cut vulnerability to U.S. policy swings. For viewers, expect more of this two-track pattern, quick U.S. wins paired with ally hedging. In the short run, tensions cool. In the long run, the map of trade and tech production shift. Closing. The signal to watch. Watch the exceptions in Canada's rollback, metals and autos, and watch customer wins at Intel. If those needles move, Trump's formula will look scalable. If they don't, today's wins could feel like tomorrow's unfinished business.
In this context, and consistent with Canada's commitment to CUSMA, I'm announcing today that the Canadian government will now match. We will now match the
losing
United
paying
States.
to bring them in and losing that value added from them. And of course, it also makes life slightly more expensive for the Canadian consumer. But I think the main reason that we're seeing this happen now is just to send a signal to the United States. I should say that this is not actually going to be that impactful in dollar terms. It's more of a symbolic gesture to say to the Trump administration, okay, we're willing to drop these and actually to tell the Canadian population.
Reaction from the Trump administration.
So President Trump himself reacted from the Oval Office. He praised this move to drop these counter tariffs. He said, and I quote, "We are working with something we want to be very good to Canada." He said that they're working on something.
Canada has just stepped back in its trade fight with the United States. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Ottawa will drop many of its counter tariffs on American goods. Within hours, President Trump praised the move, calling it proof that his tough trade strategy is paying off. But is this really a solid win for Trump, or more of a symbolic gesture from Canada? Let's dig into what's behind this move, and why it matters for the future of U.S.-Canada trade. Trump's playbook: pressure, then praise. Since returning to office in 2025, President Trump has used a very clear pattern. First, hit trading partners with tariffs, often suddenly and in ways that create pain for their industries. Second, wait for the pushback. And third, once the other side gives ground, claim victory and present it as proof that America First is working. That's what we see here. Canada retaliated with its own tariffs after Washington targeted Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos. Now, Carney has announced that many of those tariffs will be removed. Trump quickly seized the moment, praising Carney and saying the U.S. wants to be very good to Canada. For the White House, this looks like a clear validation of Trump's hardball tactics. Canada's move, practical relief, not full retreat. But the Canadian perspective is more nuanced. Carney explained that this step simply brings Canada in line with the United States. Since Washington already exempted certain goods under the USMCA free trade deal, Ottawa is now doing the same. Economically, this matters because many of the affected items were inputs, parts Canadian manufacturers needed to make finished products. By dropping tariffs, Canada lowers costs for its own businesses and avoids passing higher prices onto consumers. Politically, Carney is sending a signal. By easing these tariffs, he offers a peace gesture that may help restart broader negotiations with Washington. But this is not a total climb down. Canada is still keeping tariffs on strategic sectors like autos, steel, and aluminum. Those are the pressure points that Ottawa wants to hold in reserve. Why this benefits Trump? For Trump, the dollar amounts don't matter as much as the optics. The actual trade impact is modest, but the symbolism is powerful. He can tell American voters, look, Canada pushed back, but in the end, they dropped their tariffs. This helps Trump reinforce his political message that allies can resist, but eventually have to adjust to U.S. pressure. That story is especially useful as critics warn his tariffs could raise consumer prices and slow job growth. It also sends a warning to other partners, Europe, Britain, even China, that pushing back against Washington may be costly, and that sooner or later they too will have to compromise. Canada becomes a case Trump can point to in future negotiations. The limits of Trump's win. Still, the victory is not as clear as it seems. Canada hasn't dropped all of its countermeasures. Tariffs remain in place on U.S. exports that matter politically in America, like cars and metals. And Carney's government has shifted its approach. Rather than reacting to Trump's threats, it now responds only once actions are actually carried out. That makes Canada less vulnerable to unpredictable statements from the White House. Domestically, Carney does face criticism. Labor unions and the conservative opposition accuse him of being too soft. Yet he also enjoys backing from powerful provinces such as Ontario, home to Canada's auto industry, and Alberta, a major energy hub. Business leaders also support the move. For now, polls suggest Canadians see Carney's strategy as pragmatic, a way of protecting the economy while avoiding escalation. A new model of North American trade. The bigger story here is how Trump has reshaped the trade relationship itself. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement was designed to provide stability after NAFTA, but under Trump, its value has eroded. Partners can no longer assume free trade will remain free. Instead, they must prepare for sudden tariffs, exemptions, and renegotiations. Trump views this uncertainty as leverage. It gives him flexibility to reward or punish depending on U.S. interests. For Canada, it creates a constant balancing act. Defend core industries, but also avoid provoking Washington into further escalation. This turns what was once a rules-based system into a cycle of bargaining and tactical concessions. Canada's latest move is one chapter in that ongoing cycle. Conclusion: a victory of optics, not substance. So, is this really a win for Trump? On the surface, yes. He can point to Canada's retreat as evidence that his pressure campaign works. The White House can spin this as proof that America First policies are reshaping trade in Washington's favor. But in substance, it's far less dramatic. Canada gave ground only on minor tariffs while keeping measures on industries that matter most to the U.S. Carney framed the move as practical relief for Canadian workers and a strategic gesture to keep negotiations alive. And the deeper uncertainty around North American trade, on the fragile value of the USMCA and Trump's unpredictable use of tariffs, remains unresolved. In other words, Trump won the headlines, but whether he has secured a lasting advantage is still uncertain. The real test will come in next year's review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Pact, and in the next round of tariffs that could once again shift the balance.